All right, so I've started putting a little bit of the, an indication of the trees on the hill back here. And it does go darker. I mean, it's very neutral, but it gets darker. And I'm using a sort of worn down soft pastel. Anyway, so it has sort of corners on it. And I'm able, or you can use a newer pastel that does have corners on it. And you can just draw these down and create, feeling for trees. I'm also going to bring this up. It gets darker up in here. Really soft touch. Come back in here and get some dark in here. I like the whole idea of this all kind of vignetting around this river scene. All right. Now I'm going to come back down in here, and I see there's a light hitting this bank. So it's it's the kind of painting where at a glance, it's snow and a river, but then when you look up close, there's some pretty little details that that make it nice to look at up close as well as from a distance. So I'm hitting this with some of this lighter shade, because that cobalt blue is definitely everywhere. In fact, I'm going to come back in with a darker cobalt. Because this side is in the shade. Ooh, isn't that pretty? Here's where it starts to really pop. So pretty. Lighter touch, harder touch. Gives it variety. I do see a little brightness back in there. Okay, and I'm coming back and skimming in a little bit of the lighter shadow. All right, let's get to the trees and get this finished up pretty quickly. Although first, but wait, there's more. Let me get this a little more detail in here, create a more realistic looking edge here. Dragging it down into the water, reflection. And then we did a little light on the surface to give it that reflective look. And then this reflection of the clouds, I have to reestablish. I sort of lost that a little bit. That's a reflection of the snow on the hill. Okay, let's get some trees in. So with the trees, I'm just going really dark. I have a cherry Ludwig. This is a dark, dark green. Let's see what this does for me, if it's dark enough. So there are some trees on this little bank here, which, by the way, continues along here. And it creates a shade. That will be coming off of those trees. Here we go. I'm using the edge. These are on the bank across the way. This is sort of a mid-tone color, and I will probably come back and darken these up. Different thicknesses. Some are further away, lighter touch. But this gives me sort of a starting point to get all these trees in a neutral color. It's not as much of a commitment as going in with something really dark. And now something really dark. It's a little bit of a real dark blue, similar to this. In fact, I could even use the same. That might be the same. It's going to be fun to put the snow on these. There's snow hitting one side of all of these, and that's going to make them sort of come to life. So I have the center, sort of neutral color, and then I have the dark shaded side, and then the snow will serve as the bright light side. And this one's across the riverbank. It's on my side of the riverbank rather than over here. So I'm making this a little more detailed, a little larger, bigger than it is in that picture, just because I want to. I want it to feel like it's forward. And along with it, there's all sorts of branches, and I'll come back in with maybe even a piece of fine charcoal, something to create a little detail in the foreground there. I'm gonna come back down here. I don't like the shape that this bank is making. See, just skimming so lightly creates a look of water. I need to hit this with a little bit brighter white. I'm going back to my greenish white that I started to use on here. Then I switched to a lavender white, but that lavender I see now isn't popping enough. And I need this to come forward. But I still don't want it interfering with what's going on back there. Some little bits of color in here, little bits of sunshine, I should say, peeking through. All right, let's start with the snow on the trees. And I am going to go with something that's blue because they're vertical and the light is not hitting them like it's hitting the flat surfaces of the snow and reflecting and bouncing up into our eyes. So I'm going with a really light blue. Pretty, really pops. And so they're all the same, they're all consistent. If they're all in that same light, they're all pretty much getting that same sun on there, unless it's deeper into the woods or really in a cluster of trees or branches, so the color might go to a darker blue, more cobalt. But I think this is good color for getting these to pop. Now down here, I just drew this down and it's very similar to the background. So I'm gonna go with something that's a little bit brighter than this. Here's a little turquoise that's really bright, but let's say the sun is really hitting in a very bright way there, and I'm gonna continue it here. So it really pops from the background. So I got a little too thick there, but it was a way to separate it from the background. A little variation in color there. These trees have a little less snow on them. This is hard. I'm working from the side. I'm standing off to the side. And so I'm gonna get in front of this for a second. You can see the back of my head. I'm gonna come back into the sky, create a little more in the way of some sky holes. color in the sky before I skim branches into it. Here we go. There's so much in the way of branches without leaves now that make this scene work, that I feel like I need to get that in. It's sort of a web of branches. I'm using a sharpened new pastel, or you could use the corner of a new pastel hard edge, but I'm doing it in almost a calligraphic way, where I'm pressing down and then lightening, and as if I'm doing calligraphy, if any of you have ever done it. So it's not just boom, 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 it's pressing and lifting up. It's sort of a more controlled stroke. So here it's heavier as it comes out from the branch that it's attached to, heavier, and then I can lighten up. So heavier, and then I'm lightening. And down in here, there's, excuse me, tangle of branches. Sharpened new pastel is great for these things. I'm also going to bring in brown, because I think I remember that day there were some dead leaves. There was still some fall leaves, and just for a little touch of color, I thought maybe I'd do that. And then let me reestablish the shadows that are this pretty cobalt, because that sun is shining this way and it's creating a shadow. And it adds interest to this foreground that I felt would have been too much like a white chunk blocking the view. This is a Sennelier. This blue is snow piled up, so we have to think in terms of it being snow in the shade and mounded up. And I am making an executive decision here and bringing a brighter white back into this foreground. It does need it to pop forward. I thought I could get away with keeping it a little more neutral. And since that's not separating this enough, I'm going to have to bring this shadow down to that shoreline. Got to figure out a way to make this feel like this is in the foreground, this bank of snow, and it's sitting against the river, and it just, I couldn't get away with keeping it just light. It needs to be against the dark river. Going a little bit darker. As it gets closer to the shore, it's darker. So I'm making sure I get that in, but then also making sure it feels like reflections. Just refining the clouds a little bit and bringing a little bit of air into the top of those trees. this continues the story behind the trees, so you know that those clouds are back there. A little bit of a reflection. And I actually want to also reestablish the bright bit of water back here that I started with. You know, as you're working, sometimes the pastel falls on other parts and got a little dull. And I continue to work and put other brights in, so it wasn't reading quite as bright. So that does it, I think. And I actually am going to go ahead and put a little bit of the bright white here. I was trying to avoid it, but I still feel like I need a little bit of that to make this pop forward. The final thing that we're going to do, the fun part, we are going to make it snow. See that? I sometimes don't mind if the pastel, as I mash it, is even left a little bit chunky. So you can do it in sections and cover it. You could use a bigger brush. I like using a toothbrush because it is delicate. It leaves delicate little splatters. Woo! It's a big one. And maybe a little bit in the foreground. Let me cover this up a little bit. Don't want to get too much on there. Oops, making a mess of my black board here. Getting it everywhere except on my pastel. There we go. That's sort of fun. Finishing touch. I want to direct it more towards the foreground because you wouldn't see the same size chunks in the background. That's something that you see up close. So anyway, I think that's it. Cleaning this up with a wet wipe. I love wet wipes in my studio, not just to keep my hands clean, but they're good for all sorts of cleanup jobs. So just to make this all neat looking again, so I can see what I have without it looking like one giant big splatterboard. I like these big chunks here that happen to fall right on the tree. How about that? Hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I hope you'll try it. I'm going to include some of my other pictures from this wonderful day in the park, so feel free to use whatever you want, and be sure to post them or send them to me. I'd love to see what you do. Thanks for watching. See you soon.